Welcome. We're very lucky to have as our guest today, Professor Scott Gerber, who just wrote a very interesting article called Supreme Court Justices Are Allowed to Have Friends, which appeared in The Hill, which is in the Washington go-to opinion leader. And it's a defense of Clarence Thomas's friendship with Mr. Crow, Harlan Crow. And basically, there's been a great deal of press attacking Justice Thomas for his friendship with a millionaire who flies him around on his private jet and takes him on exotic vacations and so forth and so on. The implication, although no actual citation of any ethics rules or laws has ever been made that I've seen, and they don't even quote, as far as I can tell, any statute or any parallel case. There was one case where someone was forced to resign, the Abe Fortas case. He was Lyndon Johnson's lawyer, and he was forced to resign over, I believe it was a foundation that he ran, but that was many years ago and involved a Democrat. In any case, we know somebody who's the world's leading authority on Clarence Thomas, who's a law professor and who knows more about the Supreme Court than almost anybody else, and certainly more than I do. And today we're going to discuss the controversy over Clarence Thomas, which was started by, I want to try screen share, but I'm a little nervous about it. ProPublica did this article, which set it all off, which basically accused Clarence Thomas of being on the take from Harlan Crow. And I'm just going to ask Professor Scott Gerber of the University of Northern Ohio, who has been here many times before, and we're grateful to him for appearing. What do you think is going on with Clarence Thomas? How unusual is this case? What happens with other Supreme Court justices? And did they ever find the leaker of the abortion decision? That's today's topics.
Okay, so on the Clarence Thomas brouhaha, just some context, as you mentioned briefly. About 25 years ago, I wrote the first book about his legal theory. As I mentioned in the Hill piece that you held up to the screen, there were 15 books before mine, but they were all on the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings battle. I wanted to focus on his Supreme Court opinions and votes. And the origins of my interest in that were when I was in graduate school at the University of Virginia. I was writing my PhD dissertation, which became my first book, on the relationship between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. And while I was doing that, Clarence Thomas was nominated to the US Supreme Court. And because of who he was and who he might become, i.e. a Supreme Court justice, I just wanted to know what he thought the connection between our two founding documents was. And so that was it. It started out just like that. And because of all the controversy surrounding his nomination, I wrote up a little thing. The University of Virginia pre-released it, et cetera, et cetera. And then after my first book was published, the revised version of my PhD thesis, my editor said that why don't you do an acclamation period look at Justice Thomas's early years on the court? And so that's what I did. And at the time, he did not grant interviews. So I didn't ask him for one, but I would ask him for his speeches and articles, and he would send me those. And then after the book was published about 25 years ago, I of course mailed him a copy, and then he invited me up to Chambers. And so we met together alone for about 2 hours and 15 minutes. And he was very nice. He was more interested in talking about what I wanted to do with my career than he was about talking about himself. And so, you know, over the years, if I have a book come out, I'll send it to him. because it takes a long time to write a book. I don't send him my articles because I don't want to flood him with stuff. He has enough to read. But when I have a book, I send it to him and he writes me a nice note. Thank you. Keep up the good work, things like that. And so a couple other times over the years, I've interacted with him, and I'll give you one. He was given the commencement address at Campbell University in North Carolina. And so the dean of the law school knew me and asked if I'd come and speak at the dinner. So I did. And so we interacted a little bit there and at breakfast the
Hold on a
next morning.
second. Wait, let's start. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Okay, if you can continue. Hello?
Ready?
Yeah, sorry about that.
So was that recorded?
I'll cut it out.
Okay. So
let me turn off the phone. Hold on a second.
okay.
Sorry about that.
So I don't know where we
I
are.
apologize. All right, now I don't know how to see the. Hold on, let me see if that works. There we go. Okay, let me hit record again because I stopped it. Record. Okay.
So, I'd interacted with him a little bit over the years, and I found him to be a very nice man, Justice Thomas, and always nice to me. And then, so I know him a little bit, very high opinion of him as a person. And then in terms of Mr. Crow, I met him once, and that was when I was on sabbatical at an Ivy League university, and he was there to look at a program there. And they gave him an autographed copy of the book I wrote about Justice Thomas. And so I interacted with him in that sense. He thanked me for it, and he was asking me questions about, my interactions with the justice. And it was just clear to me that he just was really close friends with Justice Thomas and just liked him as a person.
You're talking about Mr. Crow.
Correct. And so, so when this ProPublica piece came out, and they're trying to make it sound like these two gentlemen are up to something fishy. Of course, I don't know what they talk about between themselves, but Mr. Crow said that they were just friends, and that when he goes on vacation, he likes to go with the Thomases occasionally. And so that's what they do. I mean, I have friends that I do things with as well. And that's all it was. And he said, we never talk about cases and the like. And then, of course, a couple days after the release of the ProPublica thing, Justice Thomas released a statement saying essentially the same thing. And so the title of my op-ed, usually the newspaper writes the title. I'll submit an op-ed under a certain title, and usually they'll rewrite the title. But they kept this title. And so the title was Supreme Court Justices are allowed to have friends. So that's the basic point that I'm making. I believe them both when they both said that all they are is friends who occasionally travel and holiday together. That's it.
Okay, well, now, of course, they're bringing up ProPublica, that they think that Mr. Crow bought property from Thomas, and that's some sort of skullduggery.
Well, Mr. Crow, I read that thing also. I skimmed it just before we came on the air. And, Mr. Justice Thomas, like him or not, and I happen to like him, and I know a lot of people that like him that are on the left, like Justice Sotomayor, for example. She has gone on the record more than once about how nice a guy he is, okay? And she interacts with him a lot. And so again, like him or not, he's a very significant figure in the history of the United States. And so Mr. Crow, according to that story, is just trying to preserve that historical marker, right? So he's a real estate developer. That's how he got his money. So he knows about preserving real estate, improving property, and all of that. So that's what he did. He bought the house and he said he's going to turn it into a museum occasionally. And people do that, you know. I'm in Ohio. I'm a half an hour away from John Glenn, where he grew up in Wapakoneta, Ohio. This happens. The famous people, their houses are turned into museums. So that's
and I was just reading, you know, the Obama Foundation building its library. There's a scandal. I'm in Florida. The Laura Loomer was all mad at him, you know, and Griffin gave $500 million to Harvard, and he's a DeSantis donor. But what jumped out at me when I looked up, you know, Googled him, was he gave $1 million to the Obama Foundation to build its new museum or library or whatever in Chicago. So, I mean, was that a quid pro quo? I don't know, you know. I mean, if you look at where presidents stay on Martha's Vineyard, say, we know President Clinton and Joe Biden and Barack Obama all spent time on holidays in other people's multi-million-dollar homes. I don't think they were billed for it. I don't know, you know. So in other words, and we don't know, and I'm not going to go into the rumors about Epstein and John Roberts because you don't know anything about them, but, you know, other judges and justices have a whole array of associations and sometimes not so clean deals. I mean, in other words, it's a real question, but they're using that to focus like a laser to get, in my opinion, get rid of Clarence Thomas now, because they've got Trump taken care of, and this is punishment for the abortion ruling, I believe.
Or for the gun rights ruling. But yeah, no, as I also pointed out in the op-ed in the Hill, this is just the latest of 30 years of this stuff, where they just, no matter, if they can find something they can make a mountain out of a molehill over, they'll do it. And they just don't like the fact that he's a Black conservative. Simple as that.
I agree with you.
And he's allowed to be that.
Well, in fact, it's all the more admirable because it takes a lot of courage. It doesn't take much courage to be a Black liberal, I don't think. I mean, not now. Maybe it did a long time ago. So let me ask you another question. As you're analyzing this, you talked about the need for an ethics code on the Supreme Court. Apparently, there is no ethics code right now on the Supreme Court. Although I guess laws about bribery and undue influence and so forth would still apply, like onto any court, right? I mean, you can't pay them to get a decision that you want.
Right.
Last time I checked.
They'd be impeached for that. That's an impeachable offense. Bribery, literally in the text of the Constitution, is an impeachable offense. And so they would be removed from the bench, almost certainly for that.
And that's the remedy, as you lawyers say. Impeachment.
Right. The item that you held up to the screen a second ago, I was asked to contribute to an edited book about the Supreme Court's most recently completed term, the 2022 term, the one that had the Dobbs decision that overruled Roe and Casey in it. And so my assignment was to write about the leak of the Dobbs draft. And so I looked into it. I looked into whether that's happened before. I looked into what the consequences could be if they identify the leaker, things like that. And, you know, I also discussed, as you pointed out, and I turned that little part I'm about to speak to into an op-ed. The Supreme Court does not have a code of ethics that they're required to follow. All other federal judges do. And, you know, I personally think that the Supreme Court justices should also be constrained by a code of ethics. And I think at some point in the pretty near future, that's going to happen. So I wrote the op-ed saying that. So I'm not I firmly believe in ethics, but with the thing with respect to Justice Thomas, one, there was no code of ethics that applied to him in the first place, but two, under the one that applies to everybody else, he would comply with that because there's an exception, at least there was at the time. You don't have to report, you know, vacations and hospitality with friends, and that's all it was.
So even if a millionaire takes you somewhere in a private jet, that's okay.
Yeah, you don't have to report that. Now I think you do. They just changed it about a month ago. So going forward, you would have to report it. And I'm confident that he will if he's required to do it. He said that. And he also said in his statement last Friday that he had checked with other colleagues and people on the bench about whether he was required to report certain things, and they told him he was not. And, you know, my guess, and this is just a guess, that the reason he didn't report it was, one, he didn't have to, but two, he wanted to keep his friends out of the newspapers. Because look at what Mr. Harlan, Mr. Crow's going through right now. He's in the newspaper all the time. People are, you know, accusing him of this, that, and the other. And it's uncomfortable. I'm sure of it. And I'm sure Justice Thomas feels bad about it. And so he came to the defense of his friend and made a statement about it, that we're just friends. We went on vacation. That's it.
One of the interesting things I noticed about Justice Thomas is he travels in a bus camper that he drives around. He says he doesn't like to stay in hotels when he's on the road and goes on vacation. And, you know, at first I thought, oh, well, as an African-American, he probably felt he might be discriminated against. And I was like, what, am I crazy? No, look at how that conservative judge was treated at Stanford Law School. Could you imagine the harassment he would face if he had to go on vacation and constantly check in and out of hotels and people texting people that Justice Thomas is here, Justice Thomas, here he can sleep in his own motorhome and no one even knows where he is. So I think that privacy thing is pretty compelling as an argument.
Well, on that, excuse me, you know, I've heard him speak about his traveling around the country in an RV. He just likes to do it. He likes to see the country. Lots of people like to do that. You know, they travel and they drive. They're in control of where they're going and how long they stay for, and so he enjoys that. And then, of course, they're saying he's a hypocrite because he also went on a cruise into Indonesia. But you can do both. I'm pretty sure that he spends a lot more time in the summer in his RV traveling America than he does in these luxury hotels. So maybe once a week or so, once a year for a week, he's at these resorts because he wants to spend time with some friends. But that doesn't mean he's always there. I would strongly believe that most of the time he's doing what is pretty clear to me he enjoys doing, just getting behind the wheel of an RV, traveling across the country, stopping, getting to know people, and things like that.
Well, I know Jim Lehrer also liked driving a bus, you know, so there is something that people like about that.
Yeah, John Madden,
Madden,
the great football announcer and coach. Same thing, yeah.
Of course, we grew up with Charles Kuralt on the road. Let me ask you a question about what's happening on campus now that I brought it up myself, and I saw you talking about it on TV. In preparing this, I just typed in the names of other justices to see if they had any travel paid for, but I couldn't find out too much. But I did see an article about the late Justice Ginsburg, and it said she loved to go to California, and she would fly out and she would speak at Stanford and she would speak at Berkeley, and there would be standing room only, and people would. I thought, I wonder, do you think she paid for those tickets herself? I don't think so. So do you think Justice Thomas could speak at Stanford or Berkeley and be flown out there and put up in a hotel and wined and dined by law faculty? I don't think so. I think they'd burn the campus down. So here you have like the only way these people can even do anything is quietly and privately, unless they're going to some college like the one you mentioned or law school, which is fairly obscure, or they're going to be descended upon. And so they've created a situation, like you say, where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, because they've literally created a hostile environment in most establishment public venues that where you normally would go. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think it depends. I think Justice Thomas has given many speeches at law schools and been treated politely. When I was writing the book, he would give me copies of those speeches. I think it is true that it's hyper politicized now, and the thing at Stanford was ugly, frankly. And you know, maybe that would have happened to him, but maybe not. And I don't think it would happen again, because the dean of Stanford Law School, who's on the left, by the way, she condemned the students for doing that.
How many were expelled?
Well, no, I don't think any were expelled.
Exactly. And then they immediately did it at San Francisco State to that swimmer.
Yeah, yeah, these are all fact-specific, case-by-case things, but
for a climate of opinion type. I agree with you. A few years ago, Justice Thomas could, in fact, go to a campus. I won't deny that.
right. And it is true that he used to teach on a regular basis a course at George Washington Law School in DC, and then there was opposition to that. And so he just decided he wouldn't do it.
He was driven out de facto, though.
Right, things like that. So that's not good. That's not good. And it hurts the institution. So to have someone of that stature available to help the students in a seminar during the summer or during the academic year, whenever it was, if he came to my law school, we'd love to have him. But we're too hard to get to. Well, we're too hard to get to. He did come here before I got here. He did come and give a speech here. I cite the speech in my book. But yeah, it just depends on the place.
So what's your prognosis? You've written these 2 articles. You've been much better prediction than I am. I remember when I thought that court would follow Thomas's path of the split the baby on abortion. And no, you said they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and they did. So I'll say you're the winner of the prediction contest. What do you think is going to happen? You say there will be an ethics code for the Supreme Court. Sure. Okay, that's one outcome. Secondly, what do you think is going to happen to Justice Thomas? Will he be allowed to have friends, or will he continue to be persecuted?
Both. He'll have friends, but he'll be persecuted by a small segment of the hyper partisan left. So the people that are on MSNBC, I mean, I forgot what his name is, Elie Wiesel, I think. He's he's the legal editor of The Nation, which of course is on the left. And he tweeted my op-ed out and kind of mocked it.
Oh, at least you were quoted.
Yeah. But you know, someone like that doesn't have an open mind. They're just.
So you don't see Justice Thomas being forced off the court the way he was forced out of George Washington University?
No way. No way.
Well, that's good news. I'm pleased to hear it, because I frankly was a little worried after what I saw happening to President Trump. I thought it's open season, you know, they've got the green light, get them all.
Yeah, well, one, they haven't gotten President Trump yet. They're making his life miserable. But 2, it's a different thing. I mean, if you just want to boil it down to raw politics, the House is controlled by the Republicans, so they're not going to impeach him, and there's nothing to impeach him for. So you have Alexandria AOC going on the media tour, the TV shows, saying impeach him, I'll write him myself, that kind of thing. She says, that'll go nowhere.
So that's
Nowhere.
grandstanding. That's
Right,
not
Yeah.
operational.
right.
Okay. And do you think poor Mr. Crow is going to be able to get off without being investigated and persecuted through the legal system somehow?
Yeah, I think he'll be okay.
Oh, all right. So that's
Yeah, he didn't do anything wrong. What did he do? He didn't do anything he's not allowed to do. Like, he's allowed to have friends too, by the way. My op-ed was about Justice Thomas, but he's allowed to have friends. He is.
so even rich people are allowed to have friends.
Absolutely. And my brother is not nearly as rich as Harlan Crow is, but nevertheless, he has a lot more money than me. And we're rarely in the same place. If we are in the same place, he likes to go out to fancy restaurants and have fancy wine. He knows I can't afford it. So if he wants my company, he picks up the tab. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I have other friends like that, right? Lawyer friends that make a lot more money than me as a law professor. I have law professor friends that teach at elite law schools, and therefore they make 3 times what I do. They pick up the tab usually when I'm with them. So because they want to be around me, and the same with Mr. Crow and Justice Thomas. Like I said, they're both allowed to have friends.
Oh, that's good. That's some good news we can take away. This is the first one that I've come away feeling optimistic. So thank you very much. It's a nice
All right.
sort of, Easter season thing. So, well, I guess until the next crisis, which could be next week, I want to thank you and recommend your book on Clarence Thomas. And you have a regular feature on the news in Ohio. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, they could email me at the office. So that would be S-Gerber, which is my last name, like baby food, at ONU for Ohio Northern University.edu. S-Gerber at ONU.edu. And by the way, when I wrote that op-ed for The Hill, I got a lot of people emailing me. And the people that didn't like it because they don't like Justice Thomas, their emails were laughable. How far up his, and I'll just say buttocks, is your nose, that kind of stuff. It's just ridiculous.
Insults.
Right.
Yeah.
You just laugh at it.
Well, good for you. I mean, of course you have tenure, so you can afford
so
to, at least for now. All right. Well, thank you very, very much. And I guess that wraps it up. We have the prediction. Justice Thomas is going nowhere. They're going to get nothing out of this but a waste of time. And until next time, thank you very much. But if you'll stay after I stop recording, we can talk a little bit more. Thank you.
You're welcome.